They thought it was just another dead animal on the hill. But as they got closer, they saw the smoke still rising from the horse's mane, struck by lightning, barely breathing, and yet somehow he was still standing guard. 3 men, strangers bound by fate, would spend the next hours fighting death itself. Not for glory, not for reward, but to bring a fallen guardian back from the edge. This isn't just a rescue story. It's a reminder that sometimes, even in the wildest storms, a spark of life can light a fire in us all. The snow was still falling, but the worst of the blizzard had passed. What remained was a hushed, bone-cold silence, like the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. Over the rolling, frost-bitten hills of Fox Hollow, a forgotten strip of Montana where pine trees hunched low like monks in prayer, the world stood bleached and trembling after the storm. The clouds were iron gray, brooding, dragging their heavy bellies just above the treetops. Off in the distance, a single plume of smoke twisted lazily upward into the sky, an odd, unsettling thing in the aftermath of snow. A whisper of steam, or maybe something worse. Marshall Boone spotted it first from the passenger side of the dented old Ford, his breath catching as if he'd swallowed ice. Marshall, now 63, had the hard look of a man forged by flame and solitude. His skin was leathered, marked by years under western sun and wildfire smoke. Once a wildland firefighter, Marshall had lost his wife, Caroline, to cancer a decade ago, and with her, he'd buried his ease with the world. Since then, he'd lived in the woods, building fencing and minding cabins, speaking mostly to trees and dogs. His tall frame slouched, now from grief more than age, and his sharp blue eyes squinted against the lingering glare off the snow. Next to him, gripping the wheel like it might slip away, was Colt Rivers, 38, lanky, with the wind-blown hair of a man who never remembered hats. Colt was a wildlife photographer, or at least trying to be. He traveled light, dressed in canvas and hope, with a Nikon always slung across his chest like a soldier's rifle. He had a boyish face, but eyes that had seen too many dying animals and not enough sunrises. His father, a rancher, had died in a flash flood when Colt was 15, and ever since, Colt had worshipped wild things as if they were gods who might bring the old man back. In the truck bed, nestled among rolls of feed tarp and an old thermos full of black coffee, sat Royce Delaney, grumbling to himself as he flipped through a weathered field manual. 65, barrel-chested, with a salt and pepper beard and a limp from an old rodeo accident, Royce was a retired veterinarian who'd once had the hands of a healer and now only had regrets. Years ago, he'd made a call too late, lost a beloved mare he'd promised to save. He'd never returned to practice. Now, he kept to backcountry work, patching up livestock and tracking wounded elk, always trying, perhaps foolishly, to balance the cosmic ledger. They were returning from checking fence lines, the 3 of them having agreed to meet up for an afternoon run before the roads iced again. None of them expected to become anything more than old men keeping warm by talking about winter and weather. Then came the lightning, a sound like the world ripping apart, cracked overhead, and they saw it, a jagged bolt leaping from the clouds, striking something on the upper ridge. Snow flew up in a plume of white and smoke, followed by an awful silence. Not even wind, just the stillness of something sacred and wrong. Colt slammed the brakes. "Did you see that?" he asked, already pulling on his gloves. "Something got hit," Marshall said flatly. And it wasn't a tree. Royce climbed out the back, his boots crunching onto the icy ground. "That hill's called Widow's Crown for a reason," he muttered. "Come on, bring the blankets." The 3 men trudged up the slope, their breath puffing out in quick bursts, the air sharp as glass. The snow was knee-deep in places, and the scent of ozone still clung to it like an echo. Then they saw it. The horse was sprawled in a patch of scorched snow, his white coat turned a sickly gray in places from soot and dirt. Steam rose gently from his shoulders and back, like breath from a dying fire. He was massive, clearly a stallion, but looked heartbreakingly small lying still like that, limbs folded awkwardly, nostrils twitching weakly as if confused by the air. Colt knelt first, his hands trembling as he slid his camera aside. "He's still breathing," he whispered. "Look at his chest. Shallow, but he's alive." Marshall crouched beside him, laying a calloused hand on the stallion's shoulder. The heat still radiating from the animal's skin was unnatural, not fever, but fire residue. "I'll be damned," Royce said, lowering himself to the other side. Lightning strike didn't kill him. Yet, Marshall added grimly, the stallion's mane had been partially singed. His flank twitched, but his eyes, one of them milky, the other sharp as obsidian, stared up at them, full of pain, defiance, and something that felt terrifyingly human. "Royce?" Colt asked, voice cracking. The old vet was already moving, checking pulse points, lifting the stallion's eyelid, brushing snow from his nose. "Heart's slow. Could go either way. What matters now is temperature. He's gonna go hypothermic fast if we don't do something." "Should we move him?" Colt asked. "You try moving 800 pounds of lightning-fried muscle in this snow. Be my guest." Marshall stood, his breath coming harder now. "Then we work with what we've got." From the truck, they brought wool blankets, a saddle pad, a set of camping hand warmers, and Marshall's old thermos of half-warm coffee. They wrapped the stallion's neck, shoulders, and chest. Royce began massaging the horse's rib cage with slow, rhythmic pressure, muttering instructions to himself under his breath like prayer. "I've only seen one animal survive a strike before," he said. "A mule deer back in '92. Never the same afterward. But she lived." Colt had his camera out, but he wasn't filming. He was staring into the stallion's eyes. "He's not panicking," Colt said. "Why isn't he panicking?" Marshall, his hands still on the horse's heaving flank, whispered, "Because he's choosing to stay here." The plume of smoke still rose behind them, a thread of silver in the gray sky, as if the heavens hadn't yet closed the hole they'd torn open. They didn't know yet what that horse was, or why it mattered. But they'd seen something fall from the sky and refuse to die. The wind returned just before dusk, dragging with it a deeper cold that crawled into bones and doubt alike. The three men worked around the silent, smoldering stallion, their movements awkward but urgent, their breath sharp against the gray Montana air. The ridge, once a frozen monument to silence, now buzzed faintly with purpose, human and otherwise. Royce Delaney, hunched low beside the horse's massive chest, rubbed the stallion's ribcage with firm, practiced circles. His hands, thick and veined like tree roots, trembled only slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of hope. He leaned in and whispered something low and gravelly, more out of habit than logic. Perhaps a prayer, or just a string of remembered veterinary mantras. "Still got reflexes," he muttered. "Pupils respond. Breath is faint but rhythmic. We're not losing him. Not now." Colt Rivers knelt nearby, holding one of the emergency warming packs against the horse's flank. The pack hissed faintly as its chemicals activated, flooding it with heat. He rotated it between the stallion's thigh and shoulder, careful not to jostle the creature's fragile state. Colt's face was pinched, wind-burned, but focused. His Nikon camera sat forgotten in the snow beside him, its lens fogged, useless now. He looked up suddenly, squinting toward the horizon. "Smoke," he said, pointing. "East Ridge. There's a curl of it, small but too dark to be chimney smoke." Marshall Boone stood as best he could against the gusts, scanning the ridgeline with narrowed eyes. "Could be fire. Could be worse. It's about half a mile, maybe less," Colt added. "I'll check it." Marshall shook his head. "You leave, we lose hands. You go, you take Boone." Colt blinked. Boone. From behind a nearby pine, a shaggy shape stirred. A dog, massive, rust-colored and one-eared, emerged into view, tongue lolling and eyes bright. He looked more bear than canine, with tufts of fur like torn wool and a gait that hinted at an old hip injury. Boone had belonged to Marshall for over 8 years, a foundling mutt with no breed and less manners, but endless loyalty. "Take Boone," Marshall said again. "If it's fire, we need eyes quick. He'll smell trouble before you see it." Colt nodded and rose, brushing snow from his knees. He gave the stallion one last glance. "Hold the line, old boy," he whispered before heading off. the dog loping beside him like a burnt cloud come to life. Back on the ridge, Royce repositioned a wool blanket over the horse's midsection, trying to trap what little body heat remained. He reached for another thermal pad from the supply pack, but his fingers fumbled. Marshall noticed. "You good?" Royce grunted. "Hands aren't what they used to be." Marshall crouched beside him, taking over the placement. "They did fine today." Royce didn't answer, but his jaw shifted. The quiet between them was heavy, not awkward. Men like them knew silence the way others knew prayer. In the distance, Boone barked once. Colt froze mid-step. "What is it, boy?" The smoke was clearer now, no longer a vague curl, but a sluggish line trailing from the base of a blackened pine. As they neared, Colt's boots crunched through a strange texture, ash mixed with snow. The smell was acrid, not like wood smoke, but scorched fur. Then he saw it. A young deer, barely a fawn, curled beneath a half-fallen branch, its flanks singed, sides rising and falling shallowly. Its legs twitched, as if dreaming of escape. Boone growled low, then fell silent as Colt knelt. "Poor thing," Colt said, brushing snow off the creature's side. "Caught in the blast wave maybe, or just bad luck." The fawn opened one eye, murky, unfocused. It didn't flinch from his touch. Colt looked back toward the ridge. Royce'll know what to do. He slipped his arms beneath the small body and rose slowly, the weight feather-light but heartbreaking. Boone barked again, as if calling ahead. By the time Colt returned, the sun was dropping behind the hills, bleeding orange and pink into the steel-gray sky. Royce's eyes widened when he saw the bundle in Colt's arms. "Smoke led to this," Colt explained, gently lowering the fawn into the snow by the fire. Royce assessed quickly. "Burns aren't bad. Looks dehydrated. We got that calf milk replacer, right?" In the med pack, Marshall confirmed, already moving. Colt sat beside the stallion again, who still lay motionless, though his breaths were deeper now, slower but stronger. His flank shivered occasionally, a good sign, Royce said. "We'll name her Ash," Colt whispered, stroking the fawn's brow. Marshall snorted. "Naming things now? Gotta start somewhere." Royce mixed a small batch of milk replacer in a plastic bottle and slowly fed the fawn, who drank weakly, but without resistance. The sight did something to the men, softened them, perhaps, or reminded them of the stakes they rarely spoke aloud. Night fell fully then, and with it came stars, clear, cold diamonds above the snow-blind world. The wind calmed slightly, and the sounds of breath, human, horse, and deer, became the rhythm of the ridge. The stallion shifted at last. One massive hoof twitched, then stretched. Royce leaned in, his eyes sharp again. "He's fighting," he said quietly. "He's still in this." Marshall added more hand warmers under the horse's belly, his face set. "Then so are we." Beneath the full moon, 3 men, a half-burned fawn, a lightning-struck stallion, and an old one-eared dog held vigil together. And for the first time since the storm, hope curled up beside them in the snow. The world had gone silent again. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the taut, uneasy quiet that hung in the air before something breaks. The snow had stopped falling, but a gray haze lingered above the hills, as if the storm had left behind more than cold and wreckage. A faint crackle rode the wind now, a whisper of fire smoldering under the ice. Marshall Boone stood on the ridge with his gloved hands cupped around his ears, listening. Behind him, Royce Delaney busied himself with tending to the stallion, still unconscious but with a steadier pulse now, and the singed fawn Colt had carried back. Nearby, Boone, the one-eared mutt, lay curled beside the 2 animals, rising only to sniff the air from time to time. Then it came again. Clip, clop, clip, a soft, irregular rhythm, like hooves struggling through deep snow. Marshall turned his head toward the sound, his breath misting in the air. The noise was faint but deliberate, not random, not a hallucination. "Royce," he called without looking back. "You hear that?" Royce glanced up from warming milk in a metal cup over the portable fire pit. "Hear what?" Marshall didn't answer. He was already moving, crunching down the slope toward the thin tree line below the ridge's curve. The snow was deeper here, clinging to his boots like it had something to say. He paused every few steps, listening, eyes scanning the shadows between the pines. That's when he saw her. She was standing beneath a drooping pine, barely visible through the fog. A mare, tall and frost-covered, her dappled gray coat ghostly under the moonlight. She limped slightly, her right hind leg stiff, but her head was high, ears twitching. Her breath came in long, steaming gusts, nostrils flaring. The mare didn't run. She didn't even flinch when Marshall approached slowly, palms out. "She's looking for him," he muttered. The scars along her flank were old but healed, signs of a survivor. Her eyes, wide and deep brown, searched Marshall's face and then flicked toward the ridge. "Royce!" Marshall barked, turning back. "I need the halter from the pack." Quietly, Royce rose and began rummaging through their gear. At the same time, the fawn stirred in the blankets. Colt, still out on a second patrol further down the ridge, had asked them to watch for sparks. The fire wasn't spreading quickly, but it was there, lurking beneath the snow-dampened brush. If the wind turned, it could light the whole valley by morning. Royce handed off the halter as Marshall approached the mare again. She didn't bolt, just stood her ground like a sentinel carved from winter. Marshall noticed the cuts on her legs now, superficial but fresh, likely from broken branches or running blindly in fear. Still, her eyes held no panic. Only question, only longing. He slipped the halter gently over her head. "You're his, aren't you?" he whispered. "You came back for him." At camp, the stallion shifted. Royce, checking his breath rate, looked up and blinked. The big horse had opened one eye. His ears twitched, then tilted slightly toward the woods. "Boone," Royce said. The dog stood too, tail high, ears pivoting. And then Colt returned, snow in his beard, soot in his sleeves, and a frown carved deep into his face. "Fire's under control for now," he said, "but it's still burning under the roots. Not spreading yet." He stopped short when he saw the mare being led in. "Is that?" "I think she's his," Royce said. The moment the mare came close, the stallion stirred again, stronger this time. His front legs twitched, nostrils flared. The fawn beside him let out a tiny bleat of protest at the movement. The mare knelt. Not fully. Horses don't kneel like dogs, but she lowered her head until her muzzle touched his mane, gently, like a secret passing between lovers. His breath caught. Then, slowly, painfully, he turned his head toward her. Royce stepped back. Colt watched wide-eyed. "This is going to sound stupid," Royce muttered, "but I think that horse was holding on for her." As the stallion's eyes fully opened, the fawn lifted its head, too, looking between the two massive creatures with dazed confusion. The fire hissed in the distance. Colt squatted beside the dog. "How's Ash?" "Still weak," Royce said, "but she drank more. Might have smoke damage in the lungs. Needs vet-grade attention within the day. We'll need help soon. Anyway," Marshall added, "this snow's not going to melt itself. These horses need shelter. That fire's waiting to come back." He looked toward Colt, then Royce. "And if she's part of his herd, there may be more out there. Spooked, injured." Colt looked east, where the moonlight touched the next ridge. "I'll scout a first light," he said, with Boone. The sky had begun to blush with the earliest light of morning, casting a pinkish glow over the snowy hills. The fire had dwindled to embers, just warm enough to keep the cold from creeping fully into the bones of the camp. Wind whispered low through the branches, less cruel than before but still sharp. Colt was already up, scanning the eastern ridge with a pair of old binoculars held together with duct tape and prayer. Boone, the dog, sat at his side, ears perked and breath puffing like twin clouds in the morning chill. Behind them, Royce Delaney knelt beside the now conscious stallion. The horse's eyes had lost some of their glassiness, but he was still too weak to rise. The mare, gray-coated and fierce in her silence, stood over him like a monument, occasionally nosing his neck or shoulder. Her presence had brought a change, as if her return had rekindled something the stallion had nearly let go. Royce ran his hand down the stallion's chest and paused. "Marshall," he called. Marshall Boone was sitting with the fawn, Ash, feeding her warmed milk replacer from bottle. The fawn had taken to him, curling close to his side in sleep when not feeding. Marshall rose slowly, brushing snow from his pants, and approached Royce without a word. "See that?" Royce pointed to a series of shallow indentations near the edge of their shelter. "Hoofprints. Fresh. Small. Not hers." Marshall crouched, eyes narrowing. "Young. Lighter than her. Could be from the night." Royce nodded. "Might have passed through while we were asleep." Marshall ran a gloved hand along the top of the print. "Could be a foal. Or a yearling." "That's what I'm thinking," Royce said, glancing toward the trees. "And if this one hears her mate, and if the foal wandered off, she might have been out looking." "Ghost light," Marshall said suddenly, standing. "That's what they called her." Royce blinked. "What?" Marshall's eyes were fixed on the mare. "Saw her last winter, just once. Her herd got caught in that blizzard that buried half the western ridge. They found bodies later, but not hers. Locals said she survived. Been wandering solo ever since. Ghost light. Moves like smoke. Doesn't stay anywhere long." Royce exhaled slowly. "So, if this is ghost light, and this stallion is hers, then there might be a foal out there, alone, right now." They both turned toward Colt, who had lowered the binoculars. "I saw something," he said, "on the lower slope near the dry stream bed. Movement. Small. Could be a coyote, but I don't think so." Royce sighed. "We have a choice to make." Marshall didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the stallion, then at Ash, still nestled by the now-collapsed tarp wall, weak but breathing. The air seemed to press in around them, demanding a decision. "We split," Marshall said. "Royce stays. I'll go with Colt. Boone too." Royce frowned. "You sure?" Marshall gave a tight nod. "I trust your hands more than mine. And that foal, if it's real, won't last much longer alone." They moved quickly. Colt packed light, blanket, thermal packs, emergency grain, vet tape, and a flare gun. Boone barked once, eager. The ridge beyond camp rolled downward in a steep drop toward a frozen stream bed, flanked by skeletal trees and frost-choked shrubs. As they descended, Colt glanced toward Marshall. "Think she's really ghost light?" Marshall gave a grim smile. "No other mare I've seen walks with that kind of shadow." An hour passed, then another. They found the tracks first, small, erratic hoofprints, barely an inch deep. The foal had wandered alone, confused, maybe injured. There were moments when the trail vanished entirely, lost to drifts or the scatter of pine needles. Boone was the one who kept them on course, sniffing the cold air, stopping only to look back, eyes asking, "This way?" They crested a small ridge and found her. At first glance, she looked like a pile of snow and sticks, but then a small ear twitched. She lay under a broken tree, belly pressed into the frost, legs curled tight. Her coat was pale beige, dappled with white. Eyes half open, breathing shallow. Colt's heart clenched. "She's just a baby." "For months, maybe 5, Marshall said. "Damn lucky she made it through the night." The foal tried to rise but collapsed again, weak and trembling. "Hey there," Colt whispered, approaching slowly. He knelt, reaching into his pack and pulling out a strip of dried apple. "You hungry?" The foal didn't move. Colt placed the apple close, then opened a small thermal blanket and wrapped it gently around her sides. Marshall stood nearby, scanning the tree line. "We need to move fast. She's crashing." Colt nodded, lifting the foal as gently as he could. She was lighter than ash, but her body was stiff with cold. Boone walked ahead now, guiding their return path through the shallow valley. Back at camp, Royce had gotten the stallion to drink a few sips of warm water. Ghost Light stood nearby, head turning as she heard the men return. When the foal neared the camp, she let out a soft, broken whinny, the kind that splits silence like thunder. The foal lifted her head weakly. Then everything shifted. The stallion tried to stand. Royce rushed to stop him, but Ghostlight stepped in, lowering her head to nudge him back down. The foal was placed beside Ash, who stirred and blinked at her new companion. Ghostlight approached slowly, breath shaking, and curled her body around both foals like a snow-blown archangel. Royce stepped back, tears forming despite himself. "I guess she wasn't just looking," he said softly. "She was waiting." Snow had begun to fall again, thin, drifting flakes like whispers from the sky, soft but relentless. The light from their fire flickered against the white wash of the surrounding pines, casting long, dancing shadows that made the camp feel both sacred and forgotten. Morning had fully arrived, but the sun stayed hidden behind a curtain of clouds, as if afraid to witness the fragility playing out on the ridge. Royce Delaney knelt beside the stallion with his sleeves rolled up, steam rising from his hands as they moved in precise, practiced circles across the horse's chest. His breath came in short puffs, but his eyes remained sharp. Each stroke he made with his knuckles or palm was part of a rhythm, a syncopation of pressure and warmth, his old training returning like an instinct he couldn't ignore. He had once taught this technique in university, thermal stimulation and manual reflex therapy for hypothermic livestock. It had seemed ridiculous then, something meant for goats or young calves. He never imagined it would one day be the only thing standing between life and death for a full-grown stallion. He pressed deeper into a key pressure point below the shoulder blade. The stallion jerked slightly, a low grunt escaping from his nostrils. His back legs flexed faintly. Royce didn't pause. Good. Come on. You're not done yet. Ash, the fawn, now wrapped tightly in a second wool blanket, rested beside the fire. Boone, the dog, lay curled next to her, his one ear twitching each time Royce moved. The pup had become her silent guardian, growling at the wind and licking her face whenever she shivered. Despite the exhaustion in Royce's shoulders and the cold that gnawed at his knuckles, the sight of the two animals curled together offered a warmth deeper than the fire could ever give. On the far side of the camp, the foal they had rescued hours earlier, now identified as Ghostlight's daughter, stood swaying on spindly legs. Ghostlight herself had not left her side. The mare, still limping, had taken to guarding the two young creatures like a queen holding court over her fragile kingdom. Her flanks still bore blood from the scratches she'd suffered in the trees, but her eyes never wavered from the stallion lying in the snow. That was her mate. Her ghost returned from the edge. From the ridge above, the sound of boots crunching snow announced Marshall's return. He looked older than he had the day before. His beard carried frost, and his breath was ragged from the steep climb. But there was something fierce in his step, purpose, and a thread of hope that hadn't existed when they first found the horse half dead beneath the sky. Marshall walked past the fire and knelt beside Royce, watching the stallion's chest rise and fall. "He moved?" he asked. Royce nodded, twitched his hind leg. "Heartbeat is stronger, still shallow, but no longer irregular." Marshall placed a hand gently on the horse's neck. The skin was warmer now, slightly damp with sweat beneath the white fur. "We bought him time," Royce said. "Not much, but maybe enough." "Then we push," Marshall replied. They worked together now, Royce continuing his focused stimulation while Marshall held the stallion's head, whispering low encouragements as if the horse could hear and understand. The mare neighed softly once, and the stallion's ear flicked. "That's right," Royce said. "Come on, boy. She's here." She came back. Minutes passed. Then a shudder ran through the stallion's side, a ripple like wind moving through leaves. He pulled one leg beneath him. His neck stiffened. Royce moved back. Let him do it himself. The stallion shifted, legs struggling for position. His hooves scraped against the icy ground, churning slush beneath his weight. Boone let out a low bark. Even Ash lifted her head. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, the stallion rose. First onto his knees, then his front legs, and finally, with a groan that sounded like the earth itself sighing, he stood. For a moment, he swayed, head low, body trembling. But he was up. Ghostlight stepped forward and pressed her muzzle to his cheek. He responded with a low nicker, pressing his neck into hers, their bodies sagging together like a single breath drawn in relief. Colt arrived just moments later, having scouted the perimeter one final time. His face lit up when he saw the stallion standing. "You did it," he whispered. "You crazy old thing. You did it." Royce finally sat, his legs giving out beneath him. Marshall handed him a canteen. "Didn't think I'd ever see the day a manual massage could bring back a full-grown stallion." Royce took a long drink and chuckled. "Neither did I." As the fire crackled and the animals gathered closer, 2 foals, 1 mare, 1 stallion, 1 dog, and a fawn wrapped in wool. The men finally allowed themselves to breathe. Not deeply, not fully, but enough to remember they were alive. The dawn did not break. It rose slowly, gently, as if the sky itself was holding its breath in reverence. After days of storm, silence, and snow, a ribbon of golden light crept across the white hills of Fox Hollow, bathing the makeshift camp in warmth that no fire could match. The pines that once moaned in the wind now stood hushed, their snow-dusted branches catching the first light like stained glass in a cathedral. Royce Delaney had not slept. He sat cross-legged by the smoldering embers of their fire, one hand resting on Ash, the fawn, who now lay on her side, breathing deeply. The singed patches on her fur no longer looked like battle scars but reminders she had lived. Her small eyes fluttered open and caught his gaze, and Royce, grizzled, stoic Royce, let a tear fall. It landed on the back of his hand, steam rising faintly from the warmth of his skin. He hadn't cried since the day his clinic closed. That day had been quiet too, but in a different, heavier way. Today's silence was full of life. Across the clearing, the stallion and mare stood close, their flanks touching, their heads bowed in rest. The foal lay between their legs, curled tightly into the mare's chest, a sleepy yawn stretching her mouth. Ghostlight looked out over the camp, her ears flicking now and again, but her eyes soft, tranquil. The stallion had stopped shaking. His legs still bore the stiffness of trauma, but he was upright, alive in a way that went beyond survival. Marshall Boone was boiling coffee on the old camping stove, humming under his breath, a low, tuneless sound that somehow matched the moment. His coat was dusted with frost and pine needles, his boots soaked through, but his face looked younger than it had the day before. He passed a steaming cup to Royce and said, "Didn't think we'd see this morning." Royce took the cup with a quiet chuckle. "Didn't think I'd want to." Colt Rivers sat a few feet away, the lens of his camera fogged from the cold. He wiped it carefully with his scarf, lifted it, and captured the frame before him without saying a word. The stallion, Ghostlight, the foal, Ash the fawn curled at Royce's feet, Boone the dog lounging like a tired sentinel, and the 3 of them, weathered men, bonded by something older than speech. Click! He lowered the camera. "That one's for the wall," he said softly. "Not a magazine, not the web, the wall." Marshall nodded. "Some stories you don't share. You carry." Behind them, Boone rose, stretched, and wandered toward the horses. The old dog pressed his nose against the foal's back, then looked up at the stallion. The 2 locked eyes for a beat before the stallion dipped his head slightly, a gesture perhaps of thanks. Boone returned to the fire like nothing had happened. The day passed slowly. Royce took time tending to the mare's wounded leg, gently cleaning and wrapping it with strips torn from his undershirt. She tolerated it without flinching. The foal drank small amounts of water and walked several steps on her own. Ash began nibbling at dry grass beneath the snow. The stallion never wandered more than a few feet from them all. By midday, the wind returned, not fierce, but enough to scatter the top layer of snow across the flattened camp. Colt unpacked a small wooden board he had brought for makeshift signage, normally used to mark hiking routes. Instead, he began carving it with the blade of his multi-tool. "What are you doing?" Marshall asked, watching him work. Colt didn't look up. "Marking the place." Royce stood beside him and read the carved words as they appeared. At this spot, a spark struck, but it kindled more than fire. It woke compassion. The 3 men stood in silence for a long while after the last letter was etched. Later that afternoon, as the horses rested and the animals slept, the crunch of tires over snow startled them all. A pickup, battered and red, pulled to the edge of the clearing. Behind the wheel sat a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled into a thick braid. She wore a heavy forest green coat and a scarf the color of rust. Her name was Sarah Whitlow, a local park ranger and friend of Royce's from years back. Sarah had once been known for her fierce independence and sharp tongue, but life had softened her edges. After losing her younger brother in a hunting accident, a tragedy she'd always blamed herself for, She devoted her career to wildlife protection, refusing to let anything die on her watch if she could help it. Her quiet grief had become her purpose. She stepped out of the truck, took one look at the animals and the men, and didn't say a word. Instead, she approached Royce, pulled him into a hug, and whispered, "I got your message." "I didn't send one," he replied. She smiled. "Doesn't matter." Sarah helped check on each creature, brought fresh medical supplies and oats, and arranged for the sanctuary team to arrive the next day with proper transport. When she knelt beside Ghostlight, the mare sniffed her face and leaned in. "You've got yourself a legend here," Sarah said. Marshall responded, "We've all become a bit of one." As evening fell, the golden light of dusk fell on the camp like a blessing. The fire crackled. Boone chased snowflakes. Ash licked Royce's boot. The foal nuzzled into her father's side. And somewhere, beyond the trees, the world went on, not knowing, perhaps, that it had changed a little on this ridge. The wooden sign stood tall, planted by Colt in the center of the clearing. A monument to a night of storm, a morning of grace, and the spark that lit more than the sky. Sometimes it's not the loudest thunder or the brightest lightning that changes the world. It's the quiet courage to care when no one is watching. A horse struck by lightning. A fawn saved from smoke. 3 men who could have walked away, but chose to stay. In our own lives, there are moments like these. Not always dramatic, but just as powerful when we're asked to pause, to help, to protect. It might be a stranger in need, a child lost in a crowd, or a lonely friend waiting for a call. Compassion is never wasted. It always leaves something behind. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and say amen if you believe love still exists in this world. Subscribe for more true stories of faith, kindness, and courage. May God bless you and your loved ones.